All right. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be out holding my fence up.
Should we give you a nudge if you fall asleep?
Yeah, if I'm seriously.
I hope you got a day of rest.
Okay.
All good. Good evening, everybody. 7 o'clock, so let's make a start. Agenda item 1, Chair's announcements. Before the meeting starts, I have a few announcements to make. Emergency evacuation procedures. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately following the green fire exit signs out of the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial on Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please do let me know. Note lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and do not attempt to return into the building until you have been advised that it is safe to do so. Facilities. The toilets are situated on the landing at the top of the main staircase and on the ground floor in the customer service centre. With regards to mobile phones, please ensure your mobile phones are switched off for the duration of the meeting. With regards to filming of this meeting, anyone attending this meeting is entitled to film it, but I should point out that only the councillors, officers and anyone sitting around these tables at this level may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure that cameras are pointed only in this direction. Note this meeting is also being broadcast via YouTube and being recorded. To councillors and officers and members of the public, when speaking, please may I remind the committee to ensure that you turn on your microphone and speak closely into it. A red light will appear on the middle button to indicate that your microphone is switched on. When finished speaking, please remember to turn off your microphone again. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Dobson, Frascona, Hall, Papa, Sampson and Wilson. Councillor Raven is subbing for Dobson and Councillor Walsh is due to sub for Councillor Frascona, but I understand is running a bit late.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. All members are reminded that they must disclose any interest they know that they have in terms of business on the meeting's agenda, and that they must do so at this point on the agenda or as soon as they become aware of the interest. If the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest, then they are also obliged to notify the monitoring officer within 28 days of the meeting. Is there anything to declare on agenda item 6? Okay, Councillor. Yeah, Councillor Armstrong. Members are also reminded that they should come to the planning committee. Members are also reminded that they should come to the planning committee meeting with an open mind and to demonstrate that they are open-minded when considering applications. That wasn't the tongue twister that I made it out to be, was it? Agenda item 4, minutes. Are we happy to approve the minutes from the previous meeting on the 24th of February? Agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, public question time. We have received one public statement for agenda item 6 this evening. These had to be submitted by 7 p.m. yesterday and have been published on the agenda page and have been circulated to committee members. We will hear the statement under the relevant agenda item, and those who have submitted a question will have 2 minutes to read it out. I will call you forward to ask your question at the relevant point in the meeting. Note to the committee members, we do have a green sheet of amendments for this meeting. Has everyone read that? Yeah, okay, thank you. Agenda item 6, 25/01-563/full, Twitty Grange, Twitty Feed, Danbury, Chelmsford, Essex, CM3 4PG. Can I ask the planning officers to introduce their reports to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This presentation is for the change of use of a building from a retail members club to a flexible employment use. This means that it could be used for any one of the uses applied for. EG3 is for light industrial use, for example, any use that could be undertaken within a residential area. B2 is general industrial use. An example of this type of use would be manufacturing or assembling items, and B8 is for storage and distribution. The site is in the rural area, surrounded by open countryside, as you can see. Brooks Brothers Timber Yard is to the north, and there are 2 dwellings on Twitty Fee. These are the closest dwellings to the site. The defined settlement of Danbury is approximately 300 metres away to the southwest. The building is contained within a small fenced area on the corner of Hopping Jacks Lane and Twitty Fee. Previously, it had permission for B8 use, that's storage and distribution, before it became a retail members club. This is the existing layout of the site with the existing fencing, and it's bordered by a hedgerow. The parking is laid out. The glazed screen was put in as part of the previous application for the Retail Members Club. There'll be no changes to the site or to the building. The main local plan policy is DM10C, which is change of use of land and buildings, and there's 4 criteria for that. The main 2 criteria for this application is number 2 and number 3. Number 2 is the building in keeping with its surroundings? Well, there's no changes to the building externally or to the surrounding land, so it complies with that. So therefore, it's just number 3. It does not adversely impact on the identified intrinsic character, appearance and beauty of the rural area. The key issues are the effect on the protected lane. Now, Twitty Fee is a protected lane, and highway safety and neighbouring amenity, and there are some other matters. The internal size of the building is approximately 312 square metres. Its modest size would restrict the size of the operations at the building. Therefore, it's not likely to increase traffic to an unacceptable level in comparison to its existing use. No trees or hedgerows are proposed for removal, and the traffic levels are unlikely to cause a significantly adverse effect on the character of the lane through damage to verges and such like. It's acknowledged that the glazed screen to the front of the building is likely to allow some light spill when it's dark, but that would not be enough to detract from the protected status of the lane. Additional external lighting would be conditioned, so they would have to apply for planning permission for any additional external lighting. And considering the distance of approximately 200 metres to the nearest dwelling house, this light spill would not affect neighbouring dwellings. The same would be for noise from work within the building. As I said before, due to the size of the building, it wouldn't generate unacceptable levels of traffic along the rural lane to disturb the neighbouring dwellings, but we have conditioned times for deliveries to restrict those, and also any operation of machinery or carrying out of processes within the building. It is worth considering this proposal would also comply with the MPPF and Danbury Neighbourhood Plan in that it helps build sustainable economic growth in a rural area. Therefore, we recommend this application for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand there's a Mr. Parsons who would like to speak on this. If you'd like to come forward. Hopefully the microphone should be turned on. All good?
Yep.
All good. Thank you. You've got 2 minutes.
Yep. Hello, Chair and Committee. Thanks for allowing me to speak. Obviously, it's been laid out well already. But as the owner of the property, permission was granted previously for its permitted change from agriculture to employment. The building then secured permission to be used as a members-only retail club. This is now not required, so this application, as you've heard, is solely to revert it back to employment use. There is no intensification in use in mind at all, indeed, likely the opposite. The building will revert to rural employment and provide jobs in the area. I'm told, and I've heard just now, it's in line with the national and local policy and welcome the office's recommendation for approval, but in terms of reverting back to its previous use, I feel it's the only logical conclusion. The change of use has no impact on the external existing site. It merely allows employment use as opposed to the retail club. The existing character, form and appearance of the site will all remain, and there is no change. In terms of the issue of light planning, as you know, it doesn't deal with internal lighting, it deals with external, but there will be no change to any external lighting, and the previous lighting condition has been discharged. We welcome the condition 3 for any new lighting, should it be required to be submitted and agreed, but we don't see there's going to be a need there, as the initial or the retail club was operating effectively with the existing lighting. Everything on site is as agreed and approved, and there is no change suggested or put forward in the application. And just like to thank the officers for the positive recommendation and trust it'll get approved. That's all right.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Parsons. Can I invite Councillor Armstrong to speak on this? You have 5 minutes. I'll be generous. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'll go on to a few other bits. So I'll just start with this main end point is I wish to express how strongly Danbury Parish Council objects to this application. It will lead to inappropriate harms to the rural area and protected lanes. Using one of the own officers' words in a 2024 application advisory, which is a bit of my handwriting, the removal of the roller shutters has resulted in an urbanising effect to the building, and this is unwelcome and unsympathetic in this rural area. This application was able to be called because there was a change to the drawings, which meant it had to go back to consultation. The original application that was submitted retained the original drawings of which it had previous planning permission on, which was that the shutters were in front of the glass glazing, which means when the building's not in operation, you would assume that they would be down and it would look like a rural barn in a rural area. And that is one of the biggest points that Danbury was concerned about. Just for a bit of context on this site, obviously it was a barn, it then got permitted to change to B8 use, and actually Danbury had, Parish Council had no issue with it. It actually greatly welcomed it, and it was being used for charitable use. It was then quite a contentious application when it got changed use again to the shop, but because of the community-minded benefit of this sort of cooperative food operation, it was just squeaked through Danbury to not object. But they were really concerned about things like lighting because of Danbury neighbourhood plans, dark skies policy, and the rural nature and character of the lane. The lane is already heavily used by Brooks Brothers, which is another really important business to Danbury, but they're very surrounded by trees and are very sympathetic with that. Once the application happened and the development was carried out, the shutters were not installed as per the drawing, and the planning officer's opinion at the time was that was a breach of planning. There was a lot of back and forward, and officers chose not to enforce on the basis, although it is a planning breach that the shutters aren't there, the applicant could choose to install the shutters and immediately remove the shutters, because the condition that we set as a council at the time only specified that it be built to the plans, not that it be built to the plans and maintained. This has now led to this new application. Now it's been submitted to them, actually regularising that, which we are very grateful for, because it does put to bed this matter. However, the change of use on top of now the official stance that we will allow the removal of shutters could together lead to an inappropriate harm. Particularly noting the 3 classes that they're applying for. Class 1 is very sympathetic for sort of light industrial residential areas. The final one is one that they had. The heavy industrial, with then this, as described by the officers, urbanising change to the facade, we believe is inappropriate and against our neighbourhood plan. In regards to actually bright lights, I know the pictures you showed, but actually the council could have shown the many pictures and the over 100 emails relating to this enforcement application of the bright lights from the list of buildings adjacent. And I just flicked through my emails for just 2 weeks in October 2023, and there was pictures of blaring lights through that glass facade at 10:15 p.m, 11:15 p.m, 10:30 p.m, 8:30 p.m. in the case of a fortnight, which is quite distressing for a rural area when you're used to be able to sort of see the dark skies and everything associated with that. Danbury Parish Council very greatly respects and appreciates that they want this building to be used for good use, and appreciates that they may require a change of use for that away from the previous arrangement. However, they still hold that it should have the shutters. The conditions should be more firmly written than they are, and that it isn't appropriate to change to all 3 uses, and that actually just BA would be more appropriate, or just like commercial use, the first one would be more appropriate in this case. I'll give you a minute off. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Is there anything officers would like to come back on those points?
Yeah, not a lot to add to the report, but just to confirm, there are no shutter doors fitted to the building at present. None are proposed, and it is the officer's opinion that this development is acceptable without the shutter doors being fitted. There'll be very limited light spill. And I don't really think there's anything else we have that's not covered in the officer report.
So what have officers done with regards to checking that the light spill isn't excessive?
We've taken the view that the light spill, it's internal lighting. We're of the view that that is not so harmful to warrant refusal of the application. Lighting from within the building is only going to be apparent during times of darkness, so it's the winter times of the year when the building's being used. There is a condition attached to restrict external lighting, that no further external lighting can be fitted. And it's very unusual for the council to restrict internal lighting within a proposed development. I don't recall us ever doing it before. So in essence, we consider that is acceptable. That is the view that was taken when it was decided not to enforce against the removal of the shutters. And to conclude, we just feel that has an acceptable effect on the local environment and neighbouring living conditions.
So the previous application didn't have the roller shutters as a condition, did it?
No, it didn't. No. It had a condition saying development in accordance with the approved plans.
Yes.
The development was not carried out in accordance with the approved plans because the shutters were removed. And we took the view that the removal of the shutters was not so harmful to warrant enforcement action being taken.
And if the light spill was deemed to be that bad, then shutters would have been put on as a condition on the previous application, potentially.
They could have been put on as a condition, but we cannot really go as far as saying when the shutters have to be, drawn down.
It wasn't considered a bigger issue then to put the shutters on, so yeah. Okay.
That's correct. And in terms of the application, there is only one objection to it from neighbours, although the parish council have objected.
Thank you. I will open this up to the committee. Any questions, comments or queries on this one? Councillor Larch.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I know you said at the beginning, but can you just remind me what the Class EG3, what kind of thing would you see would fall under that category?
It is any light industrial type use that could be carried out in a residential area without any harm to the living conditions of nearby residents. So it's a type of industrial use that can be carried out without noise, vibration, dust, soot, disturbance. So
Okay.
it's a use you shouldn't really know is taking place.
Is it possible to give it like an example? Like, so we had like manufacturing, if I understood right, is that in that class, or is that to be like B2?
It depends on the type of
The
manufacturing,
manufacturing.
whether it's heavy type of industry or light industry. It's
Okay.
essentially anything within light industry.
So I don't know, if there's an industrial area within kind of the Chelmsford urban area, and I'm trying to think, there's things like printing there, there's like linen, washing, that kind of thing. Is that the kind of thing that would go in that class, or is that a different class? I'm just trying to understand a little bit about what might go there.
It can't be precise. It depends what sort of industrial use it is and
Yeah.
the consequences of that use. But the planning application is for a flexible number of uses. It also includes heavier industrial uses. So both are covered within the planning application. The reason we consider that a heavier industrial use is acceptable is because of the distance between this building and the nearest residential property, which is around 200 metres.
Okay.
Would it be right that the Class C that's been applied for is almost redundant? It's because it's not a residential area and it's pretty much covered by B2.
Sorry, Chair, I can't hear you.
I apologise. Was I not looking at the microphone?
You were looking that way.
Right, I apologise. The Class E usage, is that really necessary? I'm not saying that we shouldn't be allowing it, but this isn't a residential area, and we're saying that they're applying for a use that would be in a residential area, so i.e. it's pretty low-grade industrial usage that we would allow in a residential area, but we're looking to put it in an area which is not out in the sticks, but it's not exactly going to be overlooked as such.
Chair, if I can, I'll just give you a couple of examples of Class EG3. Yes, it does say industrial uses which would be appropriate in a residential area. They could typically be things like, we've had examples of cupcake making, like a painting studio, pottery studio, small scale, maybe just one or two people assembling something without heavy machinery. So they're the types of uses. Like you say, I suppose this proposal, it doesn't much matter because they are also proposing Class B2, which is just general industrial. So an industrial use would fall within either anyway. But the distinction is those smaller, no noise, low-key kind of bakery, jewellery, pottery, artistry type uses.
Thank you. Councillor Hyland.
Thank you, Chair. Page 12 of the agenda pack, 1.5, talks about Twitton Fee is a protected lane within the rural area. Given that we've not really been given any information about how industrialised this business will be, can we satisfy ourselves that the highways have had enough information to demonstrate that there will be no harm to that protected lane? So, for example, if you start getting HGVs going down there and meeting halfway, and it looked like a single lane, I don't know if it is a single lane or a double lane, but the risk to the verges then of a protected lane becomes increased. And as we don't have the information in the planning application, should we be erring on the side of caution? Thank you.
Well, the Highway Authority have considered the application. Sorry, can you hear me now? The Highway Authority have considered the application in detail. They raise no objection and have not required further information. I think the key issue is that there is a limited floor area within this building of only just over 300 square metres. That restricts the amount of activity, the amount of traffic generated, and the nature of the uses as well. They're combined, they're unlikely to generate any significant level of traffic above what already uses a lane in terms of going to and from the timber yard. So we are content that we have sufficient information to determine the planning application and don't require further traffic information.
I think I would add to that, if you look on Google Earth, you've got the Brook Brothers, the timber merchant, which is a couple hundred metres further up the road, and that's probably 15, 20 times larger. So that in itself will generate a lot of traffic. Any other questions, comments or queries? Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from the last question, really. So, I mean, to me, there did seem to be a lack of detail in the application. We don't really know what the ultimate use is going to be, given the broad scope of permitted uses. And I'm not really sure how officers have ensured that the proposal complies with the various policies, so policy DM29, protecting living and working environments, and then looking at the Danbury Neighbourhood Plan, DNP 15, safeguarding amenity and highway safety. I know we have touched on that already. But when the operational impacts such as noise, hours, external storage, delivery patterns, we don't have any information about that at all. So how have they really been assessed or conditioned as part of the decision-making process? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the effect on neighbouring property, we have a 200-metre distance between this building and the nearest residential property, which we think is sufficient to prevent any adverse effect on their living conditions. Again, this is a limited floor area. The number of additional traffic movements on the lane compared with Brooks Brothers Timber Yard is going to be proportionately small. There are a number of conditions which restrict the hours of operation and the times of delivery, and overall we do feel we have sufficient information to determine the planning application.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just a little bit concerned about the lighting issue. We've only seen one photo in the presentation, and I wondered if there are any mitigating steps that could be taken.
We have a condition which restricts any further external lighting other than what's on the building at the moment. That is a high-level external security light and a small light, personnel light above the door. We're talking about internal lighting here, I just do not recall this being a concern with any previous planning application. It would have limited effect at limited times during the hours of darkness. Even if we required the shutter doors to be fitted, I mean, we can't really grind a small as telling them when they've got to close the shutter doors. You wouldn't want the shutter doors closed when the building is in use. So we do not feel there is such a concern or such a harm caused by the internal lighting that is so great that the application should be refused on that basis.
Thank you. Any other further questions, comments, queries on this one? No? Okay. In that case, I move that application 25/1563/full Twitty Grange, Twitty Fee, Danbury, Chelmsford, Essex, CM3 4PG be approved subject to the conditions detailed on pages 19 to 20 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Large, thank you. Will all those in favour of approving this application please raise your hand? Thank you. That is unanimous, so I won't bother asking anyone against or abstaining. So this has been agreed and the application has been approved. If Councillor Armstrong can come back in. Okay, moving on. Agenda item 7, 25/01448/full land rear of number 7 at the Greenway, Runwell, Wickford, Essex. Can I ask the officer to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for construction of 4 bungalows with a new access road on land west of the Greenway, Runwell. So you can see here the site outlined in red. The extent of the Runwell defined settlement is shown with a yellow line here. To the right of the line is the defined settlement, and to the left is Greenbelt. Also highlighted in green are a line of protected trees, which are situated adjacent to the southern boundary. It can't be seen on this image, but about 175 metres to the west is a public right-of-way routing through the open countryside. The site contains a mix of domestic and horse-related development and open land. Number 7, the Greenway, uses some of the land, including areas next to number 6, as garden, and has a pool and domestic outbuildings in that area of the site. Other structures to the west of the domestic outbuildings typically relate to the keeping of horses. Some individual structures are also located outside of the main parcel of development further to the west. The site has a split character. To the east, it's evidently more disturbed by past development, and to the west is more undeveloped and natural. The site boundaries are demarcated by fairly dense vegetation. So some photos of the site. Image 1 shows the more undeveloped western portion of the site and part of the horse menage looking towards the northern boundary. Image number 2 is still looking at the same area of the site, but is showing some more of the existing structures and shows a mobile home which is to be removed as part of the proposals. That mobile home doesn't count towards the previously developed land. Image number 3 is looking towards the rear of 7 the Greenway, with another outbuilding in the foreground. To the right of the image is the boundary with number 6, the Greenway, which has a tall conifer hedge along its boundary, masking a large outbuilding situated within its garden. Image number 4 is an example of the vegetated site boundary. Image number 5, looking towards the site access, which is proposed between those 2 dwellings. Image number 6 shows the character of housing further along the Greenway, looking back towards the site. This is the site with existing development shown, all relatively small structures, but they do provide the basis for a previously developed land assessment, and they do all add up in quantum. The large rectangle, which has not been coloured or numbered, but is shown under 2, 3 and 4 on this image, is the menage seen on the earlier photos, and that marks the outer edge of the main developed parcel. And you can see here with the aerial photo layered in that how the plan relates to the site as it is currently. And then if you can see with the proposed layout layered on top of that, how the development relates to the developed portion of the site. And then a further layering, the previously approved 2 dwellings and their development area shown in relation to the proposed layout, so you can see the difference between the 2 applications. So this is the layout plan from the last slide showing the development proposed. There's 4 units in a row fronting onto the access road with a turning head at the end, gardens to the north side of the properties and driveways to the front with parking to the sides. The undeveloped portion of the site will be left as natural land. There's no change of use. The properties will all be single storey based on an H plan form with modest vernacular design characteristics. There'll be some variation of materials secured by condition to give the buildings a more varied appearance. All the units would contain 3 bedrooms. So some important contextual points in terms of the main policy considerations. Starting with the status of the local plan. Because the local plan is more than 5 years old and because we currently have a shortfall in 5-year housing land supply, the National Planning Policy Framework directs that we must engage tilted balance. This includes in the Green Belt unless there are strong reasons for refusing development. and there are no such strong reasons for refusing this development, which I'll cover in a moment. This means the default position is to grant planning permission unless the harm of doing so significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits of doing that. The benefits would include the delivery of housing to meet the identified shortfall, which itself carries a large amount of positive weight. Tilted balance is a measure that's been introduced by central government, and its purpose is to direct councils to grant more approvals for housing or other uses that where the need is identified, based on the same assessment as would typically be carried out, but with the overall judgment of planning balance tilted in favour of granting planning permission based on that test of substantial and demonstrable harm. And this is to remedy the shortfall in housing supply. In this case, the assessment points to a limited harm to greenbelt openness and a positive outcome from the new housing, which satisfies the test and is generally a neutral outcome on planning balance. Looking at the MPPF, and this was updated in December 2024 after the previous planning permission for the 2 dwellings was granted. This has introduced several changes. The most significant to this application is the change to greenbelt section and the previously developed land test. Whereas development in a previously developed land scenario used to be assessed based on any harm to openness, the 2024 version of the MPPF now sets a test of substantial harm to openness. This essentially means that previously developed land can now be more intensively redeveloped compared to its existing state, provided it does not amount to substantial harm to openness. This application is judged to have a limited harm to openness based on its spread and quantum relative to the existing development on the site, and is therefore appropriate development and acceptable in the greenbelt. Alongside greenbelt assessment, there's now a new route for development consideration known as greybelt. The attributes of this application site and development proposal meet the definition of greybelt, as the site does not strongly contribute to greenbelt purposes. This relates to the site's already developed nature and the site being an inset corner relative to the shape of the defined settlement of Runwell. There is an evidenced housing need, as referenced before, and the site is sustainable, being directly adjacent to the Runwell defined settlement boundary, and Runwell is a key service settlement identified by strategic policy as 7. This satisfies the greybelt assessment criteria of MPPF paragraph 155. This means that even were a development not acceptable in normal greenbelt terms, it would be acceptable under greybelt considerations. The officer report sets this out in more comprehensive terms. So this slide is simply to show relationships between the development and the surrounding properties. I won't go through all of those individual distances, but all of those distances are in compliance and frankly in excess of Appendix B minimum standards. As set out in the officer reports, the planning balance, which takes into account the benefits of housing delivery alongside the limited extent of greenbelt harm and all other material considerations, results in a neutral to slight positive outcome. In the context of tilted balance, this application does not give rise to significant and demonstrable harm, nor strong greenbelt harms, and therefore grounds to refuse planning permission do not exist. There is a small amendment on the green sheet relating to biodiversity net gain conditions, which should be factored into any favourable resolution should that be reached tonight. But for now, the officer recommendation is for approval subject to planning conditions.
Thank you very much. I don't believe there are any members of the public that wish to speak on this one, but do note on the green sheet there is a representation from the people at number 6, the Greenway, so I'm sure you've read all of that. I understand Councillor Clark would like to speak on this one. You have 5 minutes, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I called this application to committee as there was a strong objection from both the residents and Runwell Parish Council. Having got used to the disappointment of the previous application, 240195 being permitted, residents now have to deal with the further distress of its replacement, which is significantly different to the previous one. Residents have also expressed much concern regarding the delay in contacting them in regard to this application and the fact it has been called to this committee. Under guidelines for development management procedures, residents should be given a fair and reasonable opportunity to participate in the planning process. On the last 2 occasions here, this has not happened, and residents have been left confused when email notifications and street planning notices have not been synchronised as to how they are supposed to contribute. This alone could be a reason for this application to be deferred to allow greater participation. Even I had an issue calling this to committee tonight when I advised of my wish to bring it here. Only after officers were minded to permit the application did I make my wishes known. There would be little point in calling this to committee if the officers were minded to refuse it. Turning to the application itself, we are now presented with an increase, as I said earlier, from 2 3-bedroom houses with a first floor accommodating potential of 10 persons and 4 vehicles to a proposed 4 3-bedroom bungalows accommodating potential of 20 persons and 8 vehicles. That's an increase of 100%. The report refers to limited harm, but there are double the number of properties and a longer road and substantial increase in the number of residents that could be living in these properties. This means an increase in the amount of vehicle movements, particularly service vehicles for deliveries, etc. What else does the increase in the number of properties mean in terms of limited harm? Well, it will certainly mean more gardens and fences, more light pollutions and more outbuildings. But one other thing it will certainly mean is more parked vehicles than the allocated 2 vehicles parking spaces per dwelling. The proposed road is nearly 150 metres long and is nothing like the existing track in its engineering. It could serve even more dwellings, and this could be a concern for residents because where does this stop? Another application with more proposed dwellings? The construction of a private road that will stick out into the open fields to the west of the existing properties in the Greenway and in clear view of the properties in nearby Waverley Crescent. It was mentioned about the tree line to the south of this location, and this would previously have obscured the row of mature oak trees that are located in the rear of the properties in Waverley Crescent. But as some members of this committee may recall, this council has not enforced the tree preservation orders that should be protecting these trees, and they have been or are in the process of being felled by the failure to prevent the decimation of these trees. Another issue I'd like to bring to the highlight is it's not clear on this report what the previously developed land was. Members will have noticed part of the land was allocated from the equestrian land and part from the garden of the existing property. I'd like clarification as to how we class a garden as previously developed land in the same way we would class the equestrian land. The flood risk might not apply to the proposed dwellings, but there is very much an increased risk to the properties in Waverley Crescent that are downhill of this proposed site. The proposed soakaways only deal with the water runoff from the immediate properties and can easily be overwhelmed. They will not deal with the amount of water that descends from the landscape of the adjacent Brock Hill and will not allow it to permeate into the greenfields as they are now targeted for development. Again, without the oak trees that previously supported the drainage. This should be a concern for residents and could result in further development if it becomes so easy to dodge the protection of the green belt as we have here. The application is outside the defined settlement boundary as noted by this council's local plan and briefly mentioned by the officer in this report. What does the new NPPF guidance say about defined settlement boundaries? Well, very little from what I could see, because we do know from our plan it's a previously held development envelope presenting urban sprawl such as the green belt, which is what this location clearly is. As for the grey belt, well, this seems to be very much open to interpretation in this case. It does refer to development outside of these boundaries that can be permitted in very special circumstances This application, in my opinion, does not pass the test of the very special circumstances. NPPF encourages there to be clear and permanent boundaries that can easily be recognisable within the local plan in relation to the Green Belt. Our local plan does this. This application is outside of the Green DSB, and the Green Belt should be considered inappropriate. Harm to the Green Belt should be clearer, in my opinion, than this report suggests. There is a fundamental difference between the existing buildings that are at best part-time equestrian purposes and the proposed building of 4 residential dwellings that will, of course, be occupied constantly and are more compacted in their design than the existing outbuildings on this property. To summarise, members, in my opinion, this application is contrary to the DM6, which aims to protect the openness of the Green Belt, and S11, which covers the role of the countryside and should protect the rural character, openness and beauty of the areas outside of urban settlements. Subject to your scrutiny, members, I trust you will agree with my comments and refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I was rather generous with the time allowed there. Officers, could you come back on one specific point, first of all, with regards to notification to residents, signage, emails? Were they put out in the correct time frame?
I've just put on the screen the site notice photos, which demonstrate the dates on which the site notice was posted. So the initial notice went up at the site entrance. You may recognise this from one of the earlier photos as being the site entrance on the 7th of November. Following some changes to the application content, a further notice was put up on the 19th of December. The resident, I believe we're talking about the resident of number 6, the Greenway, who submitted comments, I believe, on the 19th of March, or the 18th of March, 19th of March. All of the application consultation has been carried out in accordance with requirements of the Development Management Procedure Order. The consultation period has been extended quite substantially, and in fact the green sheet contains the late comments that we received for members' benefit tonight. So there's been no lack of communication about the application, its existence. The site notice contains all the details for accessing the drawings or the content of the application, and provides details as to how you can comment on the application. The notification of tonight's meeting, because the comments from that particular neighbour came in so late, they actually came in after the notification for this committee meeting. That's really what I've got to say on that.
Thank you. That's quite a decisive summary. I'm more than happy that the committee can make this decision tonight. There is no need to defer anything. Is there any other points you'd like to come back from Councillor Clark's speech?
Yeah, there's a few comments. I think there's a comprehensive officer report, so I won't go into everything that's been mentioned because the report deals with a lot of that. But the point on more development, I think the point that I would make is a two-part point on that. First of all, the application that we've got before us is for a fixed quantum of development. That's the basis on which we have to consider the proposal and make a determination. And hopefully the officer report and my presentation make clear that the quantum, scale and spread of the proposed development in this application is considered against the existing development, and there is a clear separation between the developed and undeveloped portions of the site. Whilst we've come to a conclusion, or officers have come to a conclusion, that the proposals result in a limited harm to Greenbelt openness, that harm would increase exponentially if you develop into the more open portion of the site. You would quickly reach a substantial harm threshold, which would contain the potential for future development quite well. I obviously can't predetermine any application, but I will just mention there's some appeal precedents out there which have looked at that precise issue of a previously developed site, but it having two characteristics. One is developed and one is not developed, undeveloped. And there is a clear distinction in terms of the mindset and how the previously developed land policy presumption works relative to those two distinct characteristics of a site. And just because an overall site is previously developed would not mean that an extent of development going into an undeveloped portion of a site would naturally be considered under the same policy considerations. So I think that's going to contain development in the future without prejudice. The issue of grey belt consideration. The grey belt, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding here because very special circumstances have been mentioned. Very special circumstances are what applies under certain considerations in relation to a standard green belt assessment. When we're talking about grey belt, the considerations that are applied relate to the preservation of the green belt and its sorry, I forget the exact terminology that's used. It's a strong sorry, I will find it. It's here somewhere. Strongly contribute to green belt purposes, and the planning practice guidance sets out what that actually means, and that's what's been followed in relation to this case. So I'll just reiterate what I've already said. The fact that the site has got some development on it, the fact that it's an inset corner of the defined settlement, it's not extending an irregular finger into the green belt. The planning practice guidance is very clear that would qualify as grey belt development. The tree line and the how well preserved those, or how well looked after and protected and all the rest in relation to the tree line of protected trees along Waverley Crescent. Can you just bring up that one? Yeah, that's good. You can see here the distances that we're talking about in terms of any relationship between dwellings or any associated activity along that driveway. The dwellings themselves, which are single storey, are 46 metres from that edge of the site. The turning circle or turning head is 20 metres from that edge of the site. There's no impact on the trees themselves, and there's clearly no impact due to remoteness on the neighbours to the south of the site. I think that's, unless there's anything else, that's probably what I'll come back on.
You've covered most of the points I've noted. Could you just clarify whether gardens are classed as previously developed land or not? So I believe they are, but
well, that's been tested through appeal case law that gardens constitute previously developed land. Any development, irrespective of whether it's garden or horse related or relating to any other use, if it's development, and the quantum of development can count towards a previously developed land assessment.
With regards to parking, Councillor Clark raised potential issues, but I'm assuming, well, I believe looking at the pack, that it does meet the guidelines.
Yeah, so there's two. The requirement is 2 spaces per dwelling. That's what's shown, and the driveways, in truth, could accommodate more if needed, but the requirement is met.
And the last one I've noted was increase in flood risk. I'm assuming this has been looked at.
Yeah, so we're talking about a site which is flood zone 1, and it's not an area that's got a higher probability. This particular site isn't noted as higher probability of drainage, surface water flooding. It's also, the site is not required, because of its size, because of the quantum of development, we're not required to go through the lead local flood authority on this particular development. Put in context, and with the image on screen, the vast majority of the site remains undeveloped. The gardens are likely to remain, at least in part, undeveloped. The driveways and the access road would be permeable surfacing, allowing water to infiltrate through that surface into the ground. Building regulations will pick up on the soakaways as regards the individual properties, but these there is not considered to be any drainage issue associated with this development.
Thank you. There were the notes I made from Councillor Clark. I've got a few questions before we open this up to the committee. The new road, is it between 6 and 7?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Are number 6 and 7 losing any parking spaces from this? Are they still going to have adequate parking provision?
So there's still space for vehicles to park. So this doesn't relate to number 6 is a separate site, just to be very clear. And number 7 has frontage area retained to it. So there's space for that. You can just see the driveway off there. There's still access for parking to that property. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you. I do appreciate we look at every single application on its own merits, but the history on this site, there were the 2 previous applications. One was refused, then the same application was resubmitted. Why was that first one refused? Is it a case that it was a close decision, or was that just a paperwork exercise?
No. So, I mean, I'll create a distinction between this application and those 2 earlier applications for the 2 dwellings. So this application pretty clearly has come about because of the change in policy. So it doesn't really have a direct relationship to what happened before. The 2023 application for 2 bungalows was acceptable in all regards, except it lacked a BAT survey. And that was the sole reason for its refusal. In 2024, the same application came back with a BAT survey, and that confirmed there was a single instance of a common pipistrelle in what's called building number 4. That required a European protected species licence to disturb that bat. Since that application was approved, the building number 4 has, the licence has been obtained and the building number 4 has been removed. There is no further ecological conflicts with this application as presented, and it comes with a preliminary ecological impact assessment, and all of the survey work that was provided for the 2024 application is still in date.
Thank you. And so the change in NPPF guidance between the 2 bungalows and this 4 bungalow application is that difference to the harm of the openness, isn't it? I believe, from any harm down to substantial harm.
Yeah, I always think about it as an upward shift, but right. Yeah, so that's the difference, and I suspect that's the reason why we're looking at an application looking at the application that we now are, compared to those earlier or the earlier approval. The test is now substantial harm impact to openness,
which is quite different. Yeah. Okay. I'd like to open this up to the committee. Any questions, comments, queries? Councillor Hyland.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 29.2.1 talks about the application is within the green belt. So this green belt and tilted balance is coming forward at a disturbing rate to impact the protection of green belt. I'm seeing these applications, I'm calling them grey applications like this, because they're actually testing the waters. Initially with this 2 bungalows being granted, and now the developer seeking 4 bungalows. What condition can be applied to ensure a further sprawl into the greenbelt is less likely to come forward? I think you mentioned just earlier, which sort of half answered my question, PDL so previously development land, undeveloped portion being protected. And my other question I have is, this lack of a 5-year supply in a local plan is, in essence, the cause of this tilted balance. When do we plan to close this open door?
Come back on this,
yeah. Thank you, Councillor Hyland. So the issue here is that since the approval for the 2 bungalows in 2024, that predated the 2024 National Planning Policy Framework. It's the national policies, the national planning policies that have brought about the change in consideration. So as I've pointed out, the test at the time of that application for the 2 bungalows was any harm. So you consider any harm based on any uplift in development against that existing land use or the existing development. Now, the 2024 version of the NPPF requires that we consider whether there's substantial harm which allows for an intensification of development. That is the key difference here. So it's a change of policy. I don't think it's fair to say this is a testing of waters, because it's simply a change of policy base. Now, I'll just cover off the point I was trying to make earlier, that we do have a site here. It's a game of 2 halves, in that it's part of the site is developed, part of the site, or a large part of the site, is undeveloped. And there are some clear tests, if you go through appeal decisions, where inspectors have considered the point that I'm trying to make, which is you may well have a previously developed site overall, but where you are talking about bringing development into the undeveloped parts of the site, the impact that that development will have is it will exponentially grow if the further you are away from that developed portion. There's obviously some allowance for a bit of development give and take here and there. What this particular slide shows with the overlay is that we are talking about development on the developed portion of the site, and the undeveloped portion of the site, there's no change of use. It's undeveloped. It doesn't benefit from any form of permission or positive way of looking at that in relation to future development. It simply would be tested against the policy that exists at that time. I can't promise you, and I can't defend against future changes in national policy. So I can't promise that we can defend that open space in perpetuity. This permission, if it's granted, would not prejudice our ability to consider on merit, if there were a development proposal for that open area of the site, we would consider it against the policies that we're currently working with. It would have a very different policy consideration compared to the current application that we've got before us, because that is purely based on the fact that the site has been previously developed, and we are within the envelope in terms of floor area, not by much, but we are within the envelope in terms of the existing floor area comparison to the proposed floor area. Obviously, an application for more development would probably take us beyond the existing development. In terms of the 5-year housing land supply, obviously the local plan review coming forward, we hope later this year, and that should put us in much better stead as regards our 5-year supply of housing. And of course, once we do have a 5-year housing land supply, the tilted balance is disengaged.
If you'd like to come back on that, Councillor Ireland.
Thank you, Chair. So, just the first part of my question I asked, can a condition be applied to ensure further sprawl into the Greenbelt is less likely to come forward, or you are not in a position to do that due to national policy?
It's a point of prejudice in a way. We can reasonably work with the development proposal, and so we have put conditions in place as regards residential permitted development and removing permitted development rights relating to what people might want to do on individual plots. But this proposal doesn't propose to make any changes to that undeveloped portion of the site. So we're not then at liberty to put additional controls in place to prevent people from coming forward in future with a development proposal. It would prejudice their ability to do that.
Thank you. Kirsty, if you'd like to come in.
Chair, if I may, just to just address those couple of points. We can't put a condition on to prevent further development. If the proposal was 6 houses, 8 houses, that would need a fresh planning application. We would consider it in the same way. So we don't need to put a condition on to prevent any further applications. They'd all be assessed under the policy that's in place at the time. Just in terms of the 5-year land supply, as Neil said, this scheme in officers' view is compliant with the Greenbelt policy. So we're not actually really in the world where the balance is tilted, because we're saying there isn't substantial harm to the Greenbelt. But on that point of the tilted balance and 5-year land supply and when does the door close, essentially we need to deliver planning permissions for houses which then go into our supply. As Neil said, through our local plan, through the local plan review, through our Regulation 19 consultation, we're trying to bring sites forward, but essentially we need to grant permissions to get those in the supply. They all help.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. This slide here is a very useful one. It does clearly show that previously developed land.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on that point before you
just
take a new one?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. Substantial is still subjective. It's a subjective test. And I'm just not sure where on the border it got to in this particular instance. I don't know if those calculations are to hand for just future education rather than for this planning application. And of course, the local plan requires sites, doesn't necessarily require us to develop those sites, just to identify the sites and they are viable sites.
This is I'd have to refer you to the officer report for a more comprehensive review of the assessment. But in terms of substantial harm and whether we've reached that threshold, we haven't. As I put in the report, in the presentation, there's a limited harm to openness, and that relates to the fact that we are within the square meterage of the existing development. This development does not extend beyond that. If you take this as a cumulative, a cubic assessment, that these properties do result in more cubic content of development. But the development has been contained to the development spread, so that's another factor of consideration. By containing it to development spread, it's not having greater harm to openness, and we are talking about single-storey development versus single-storey development on the existing site. So really all we're talking about is, whilst there might be, or there is, more cubic content, as a development envelope, that cubic content does not spread beyond what's already there. On that basis, the harm to openness is limited. Had we extended far beyond, had we gone massively beyond the floor area that's already there, had we gone to another storey height, Those are the sorts of things that would push that consideration assessment outcome higher up that grading and would end up ultimately at a substantial harm threshold. But we're not there with this proposal.
Thank you. Could officers confirm that the recommendation for approval on this is more to do with the change in the MPPF guidance and the tilted balance? Would you be recommending for approval if we didn't have this tilted balance scenario?
Yes, because of grey belt. So the report sets out that basically the assessment here is a green belt assessment, but to make sure that we're covering all of the requirements under the MPPF that we are required to, the green belt assessment would still come out saying that this development should be approved. So even if we completely disregarded all of the green belt assessment and tilted balance and everything else, we would still be saying that the grey belt assessment tells us that this development should be coming forward.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Everything's looking a bit grey at the moment, where I see it as much more green. But you use the word inset a lot, and obviously I understand why that's important and appropriate in grey belt. But considering the visual impact of all those gardens that are there will not be having a detrimental impact on the broad visual sense of the area. I wonder how inset this site actually is, especially considering you said that it should not protrude into the green belt. But I would argue because they haven't chosen to develop the southern part of the site, those two houses very much do protrude into the green belt area. And you said that it shouldn't allow for potential of further development, the protruding, i.e. making further bits of inset land as part of the development to turn further green belt into grey by a nature of the layout and property. As in, the first two, arguably the first three, and if the fourth one had been positioned to the south of the third one, would not create further inset land and further potential land that could be viewed as grey belt. But because of the choice of this application, because of the choice of how the turning head's done at the end, it is creating more inset land immediately adjacent to the development boundary and arguably creating more grey belt land from green belt rather than just converting a blob of grey belt land into green without creating the urban sprawl that the green belt's designed to protect. So I do have serious concerns on the choice of layout. I appreciate they're trying to map what was the previous development, so to speak, but as large part of that was equine and rural, we should be seeing anything that should be naturally seen within the rural character of an area as green and not grey as such. It's not an old building, it's an old equine setting. So that's main point. But my second sort of point that I am slightly always disappointed by is when we have a clear end cul-de-sac and we jut straight through the centre of the turning place for cars and put another entrance, which basically creates a four-way flow, almost a mini roundabout of potential ways that cars may choose to drive in and then reverse back to turn round, plus cars exiting. Which I don't think that this site majorly sort of encourages or allows the extra development of those four. It might be appropriate for one or two developments, but doubling that might cause problems there.
Thank you. Come back on those.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. So I'm going to flip-flop a bit here because you've got we have done two, if you like, in tandem assessments. So whilst a moment ago I said, even if you switched off green belt, you've got grey belt. Even if you switch off grey belt, the assessment on the green belt is still coming out and saying that under the MPPF, this application does not result in a strong green belt refusal, and that's, as I said before, it's based on the assessment of the proposed development versus the existing development on the site. The issue of inset, and I don't want to cause any confusion here, when we have looked at the grey belt and the tests that we are required to go through in relation to a strong contribution to the green belt purposes, when we're looking at that, it sets out a number of considerations, and one of those considerations that it mentions in the PPG is inset. It's the pattern of development. So when we're looking at the pattern of development in relation to the defined settlement boundary extent, if this were taking a more linear approach, a more ribbon approach, and extending development along a road, for example, away from that existing, more typically circular pattern of growth, I know they're never circular, then that would be a more harmful outcome. We are talking about a corner, an inset corner of the development pattern as it already exists, and therefore on that basis the PPG says that the site is better contained, which it is anyway because of its quite heavily vegetated boundaries, and because it's already been developed, that site would actually constitute grey belt anyway. The reason why the development is shown the way it's shown is because it has followed and is following Greenbelt previously developed land principles, which they're required to do to qualify under the Greenbelt assessment. So they're taking away one bit of development and they're putting another bit of development in its place, and that's essentially the pattern of development that you end up with. I do take the point, but the reason, the rationale for that is because that's what the Greenbelt assessment, that part of the assessment is requiring them to do. The character of the buildings really doesn't come into the equation. The NPPF doesn't make a distinction in terms of the previously developed land, doesn't make a distinction between or as to what development looks like in the first place. It's about its physical attributes, and that's what we've assessed this development proposal against. And in relation to the access, obviously the highway authorities looked at that access and has confirmed there's no safety or functional concerns. It was previously approved for the 2 units. I appreciate you've pointed to that anyway, and said that the activity on that access would increase with this proposal, which of course it would do with the two extra units. But that earlier permission in 2024, it remains extant. That access actually could be implemented under that earlier permission. And we're talking about here an access with a width of 4.5 metres. It's got a nice straight run, it's got good forward visibility, it's got clear visibility to the driveways around that turning head. A lot of those turning head driveways are unconventional, but you do have good visibility to all of them. And you do have the turning head on this application, which you didn't have with the earlier permission. And this turning head allows for all manner of vehicles to enter and leave the site in forward gear. It's a much safer outcome in relation to the access, this proposal, versus the one that could be implemented.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Trom.
Thank you. I just have a question about the comments Councillor Clark made about the trees and there not being preservation orders and the suggestion that some of them are being felled. Bearing in mind there's been a lot of focus on all of the way that creates the boundary that it does. Have you got any views on that, please?
Councillor Tron, I can take the answer to that one. I think what Councillor Clark is referring to is those protected trees. There were a couple of planning applications to fell 3 oak trees in total a couple of years ago now. So it was one application to fell 2 trees, another application to fell a third. They came before the planning committee. They were made on the grounds that the trees needed to be felled for subsidence reasons. They were causing subsidence to the properties, and the committee resolved to grant consent for those trees to be felled. So that has been dealt with through the correct process.
Councillor Thorpe-Apps.
Thank you. So we've said that grey belt land is defined as previously developed lands that does not strongly contribute to the green belt purposes. The site is adjacent to open countryside, so would it not therefore inherently contribute to the green belt in some sense, even if just acting as a buffer? And part of the site is a residential garden. We have already discussed this, but my understanding is under the MPPF, lands that is in or bordering built-up areas, such as private residential gardens, is generally excluded from the definition of previously developed lands. So this seems to conflict with some of what we've been talking about. So could you just clarify, is it really previously developed land? Can we be confident that the report's assessment on this is robust? And does the site's location and character mean it still strongly contributes to greenbelt purposes? And secondly, under the MPPF, for there to be a development in what we're calling the grey belts, the site has to be credibly described as sustainable. Sustainability, as I understand it, is generally the weak point of these grey belt applications, which we're all getting used to. And the MPPF says that sustainability isn't just about proximity, but it's also about things like active transport. Here we have a site that's located at the end of a long private drive within the cul-de-sac, together with the provision of 2 parking spaces per dwelling. So it's pointing to an inherently car-dependent site, encouraging routine reliance on private vehicles. There's limited evidence that public transport links or walking routes are sufficiently convenient for practical day-to-day needs. I think there is mention of a bus route, but there's not much about that. So can we be confident that the site meets the actual grey belt requirement for a genuinely sustainable location? Are there shops, schools and other amenities that are actually in walking distance? And if not, can we actually say it's sustainable, and does it pass that test? Thank you.
So in terms of the grey belt and its contribution to the point of the green belt, when you're assessing this against the planning practice guidance, there are 3 categories of assessment. There's strong, moderate, and I forget what the last one is. But the grey belt paragraph 155 that's MPPF paragraph 155 refers to a strong contribution to green belt purposes. That's what we're required to assess against, and that's the conclusion we've reached is that this isn't a strong contribution. It's probably a moderate contribution to green belt purposes, but the wording of the MPPF is specific that it has to be a strong contribution to green belt purposes, which we're not achieving that threshold with this particular site, being as it's got previously developed. The site is capable of self-containing itself because of that previous development, and because of the shape of the defined settlement. This is a mix of development, of garden and other development, and it is genuinely previously developed. It's been that point has already been passed by virtue of the earlier approval. It's already that is a material consideration in terms of how we can look at this, and that's an extant permission as well. And then in relation to the sustainability, there are bus routes, and this is a key service settlement. Our local plan points to this being a suitable site for development in terms of its relationship to services to meet community needs. There's a walking distance to the local bus service, and it's a reasonable walking distance or cycle distance to the various local services, including shops and doctors and such like that are within that settlement area. So this is a sustainable site for new development.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments or queries? No. Okay, in that case, I move that application 25/01448/Phil, land rear of number 7, the Greenway, Runwell, Wickford, Essex, be approved subject to the conditions detailed on pages 41 to 46 of the agenda pack and the adjustments on the green sheets. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Large. Will all those in favour of approving the application please raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4. Will all those, thank you. Will all those not in favour please raise your hand? 3. Okay, thank you. And any abstentions? No. Okay, that's passed. The application has been approved. So yes, thank you. Agenda item 8, planning appeals. There were 4 100% success rates. Thank you very much. Meeting closed at 8:25.